Hey internets, time for a quick rant. So one common question that is kind of an underlying background radiation to ranking various political takes and statements out there is the question of what's the main difference between a midwit argument and a dimwit argument? An answer to this is actually pretty simple. Dimwittery tends to be just flat out wrong or lacking in basic common sense, like cactus divided by cat butt. It makes you wonder why you're even talking to this person, because dimwits just generally tend to have no real grasp on reality, and it usually stems from people just not exactly understanding what it is they're interacting with. While midwittery, on the other hand, tends to be what I like to call pedantically correct, with the pedant being one of the very few actual good Wikipedia articles out there, because it shows just how the midwit problem is possibly as old as human history. A pedant is a person who is excessively concerned with formalism, accuracy, and precision, or one who makes an ostentatious and arrogant show of learning. And you just gotta love the painting by Thomas Rawlinson there. People often see the soy jack as some kind of new thing, when in reality it's just an evolution of stuff we've known for ages. For good memes are truly eternal. Also, just a quick reminder, a midwit isn't necessarily someone who is of average intellect. There's nothing wrong with being average. Rather, they are someone who tries their hardest to make themselves look like the smartest person in the room, despite not actually being that bright, and despite adding little to no ideas of value to the table. This is why there's usually some kind of superficial nugget of truth in a midwit statement, but it's true in a way that either misses the point entirely, doesn't add anything to the conversation, or is otherwise an irrelevant nitpick where the midwit will then pretend that a P not crossed or an I not dotted somehow refutes an entire argument. In other words, the midwit is usually superficially correct about one small detail, but wrong about the big picture, and tends to be intellectually dishonest. And this is why midwits generally tend to adopt whatever the most dominant ideology that exists within the academic and journalistic cathedral happens to be. If one only looks at the details of what is acceptable opinion, but lack the ability to criticize the dominant ideology as a whole by taking a step back and seeing it for what it truly is, and analyzing it for what it truly is, they will inevitably be consumed by it. They will then proudly wear these correct opinions trademark as a badge of honor. These days, the religion of postmodern progressivism tends to be the dominant ideology, so that's what a lot of midwits tend to profess. But it has been different in the past, and will likely change to something else in the future. But one thing that doesn't really change with time is what a pedantically correct statement looks like. For example, one very common thing you might see from a midwit is that they will argue against a definition based on some precise detail that doesn't really change anything that's being said. Some superficial difference that just doesn't matter at all. Or they'll make an accusation that you have made a straw man argument based on differences between what has been argued against and what they claim to profess that are just completely irrelevant and don't change anything. Which means that a very common thing you might see from them is something called a nitpick fallacy, where they'll focus on these trivialities and then pretend like doing so has refuted the central point, when in reality they've simply avoided the central point. Things like, well, that's not the academic definition, and then they'll immediately proceed to give a new definition that doesn't really meaningfully change anything. You also might see a lot of appeals to authority coming from these people. They think that if they can cite a gish gallop of reliable trademark sources, then they will eventually become correct, when in reality it's being able to analyze the data within those sources and reason out what the truth of what the data is telling you is what makes you correct. That kind of provides an easy way to tell which academics and scholars are pedants and which ones might actually know what they're talking about. The pedants are always arguing with each other with things like, well, my paper cites 50 sources. Oh yeah, well, my paper cites 60 sources. Good for you, buddy. And then, of course, the pedants will use their ballade of sources to partake in data cherry picking, another one of their favorites. They'll find the one piece of data that seems to make it look like they're correct, not really analyze anything else, again, because the key feature of the midwit is that they miss the big picture, and then they'll pretend that that one piece of data means that they have won. Or they will say things that are technically true, but doesn't actually disprove what is being said. For instance, a really common one I see a lot of people call out when they're making fun of midwittery is correlation does not imply causation. Because again, that's technically true, but the problem is that simply saying that doesn't automatically disprove the causation. You can't just say correlation does not imply causation. You have to actually look at that correlation and look at other factors and reason out whether or not there's some kind of causal link between the correlation. Just pointing out my correlation does not imply causation alone doesn't add anything to the conversation. And this can get a little bit dangerous, because sometimes these pedantic cathedralites will try to blame something else that correlates with the problem. That is, again, technically true, but misses what's going on. I'll give an example by refuting something I saw recently as a way to end this quick rant. There was an ad by this group who is supposedly dedicated to stopping hate, and they said that the best way to stand up to hate is to not be silent, and they identified silence as the main thing that all hate thrives on. And there's a problem with that. It's technically true, but not really. Silence is really at the root of nearly all bad ideas spreading, not just hate. If a bad idea is being propagated and the people who understand how to refute the bad idea stay silent, then yes, That silence does contribute to the problem, but simply calling out the silence itself kind of misses the point. It doesn't really refute the bad idea. It's too broad of a claim. You can make this same argument about every single bad idea out there. Include that it is silence at the root of it. The true heartbeat of collective hatred is in fact just the idea of collective guilt. So the proper way to disprove collective hatred is to point out why collective guilt doesn't actually make any sense. But of course, a problem with a lot of these groups that claim that they're standing up against hate is that these groups often believe in a lot of woke progressive nonsense that actually believes collective guilt is a good thing. So of course, they can't call out collective guilt because they believe in collective guilt. So instead, they misidentify the problem as silence. And while it's technically true that silence can be argued to be at the heart of every bad idea, it doesn't really touch on the central point of the problem. It's a take that adds absolutely nothing of value to the conversation, or in other words, they are, as I like to say, pedantically correct. Anyways, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, share, subscribe, comment, tip, and all that good stuff. Till next time.